In the shadows of this man's mind lay confessions of unspeakable acts, crimes so dark, they chilled an entire nation. He confessed to taking the lives of 30 people and was convicted for 8 of them. For years, the world believed his stories. Investigators called him Sweden's most prolific serial killer. But what if the monster wasn't real?
Det är mycket enkelt. Quick har aldrig ens träffat något av de här offren. Utan det är rena fantasier.
What if everything he confessed was a lie? This is the story of a serial killer who never existed and one of the biggest crime scandals in Swedish history. There are many ways in which we can start this story. Styr Bergwall had committed crimes early in age and was sentenced to closed psychiatric care. And in the beginning of the 90s, he admitted to his psychiatrist that he had committed a specific crime. He would during this period take on the name of Thomas Quick. On November 7th, 1980, an 11-year-old boy named Johan Asplund disappeared from his home. He was supposed to be picked up by his father after school that day. A neighbor last saw him outside the front door of his house in the morning, but nobody knows what happened next. One suspect was an ex-boyfriend of Johan's mother, and 5 years later he was sentenced to 2 years in prison against his denial for unlawful deprivation of liberty. He was released 1 year later after an appeal against the sentence. Even though there were reasons to suspect this person, there was not enough evidence to prove that this man had been guilty of the child's disappearance. 13 years after the disappearance, Thomas Quick said that he took the child's life. Due to his therapy, Quick had dreamlike memory fragments of how he killed the boy. His therapist made his own investigation and they brought Quick to the place where the boy was last seen. Quick had panic attacks when they reached the neighborhood, and the investigators saw this as a confirmation of their suspicions. He would tell them how he chopped up the boy's body in parts, and he pointed out places where he had buried the body parts, but the police could not find anything. No evidence or trails of the boy. Thomas Quick's therapist decided that they would along with him do their search for the body parts. Quick claimed to find bone parts of the boy's finger during the search, but that he ate them right after he found them. This means that he would have eaten the only technical evidence for this case. His credibility to have committed the crime was questioned, even by the boy's parents. But Quick was not done. Even though he was suspected of murder, he was allowed multiple permissions to go to Stockholm, where he would visit the library and look up old news articles of another murder case of a 14-year-old called Thomas Blomgren in the year 1964.
Det fanns foton på den här boden där han hittades. Det fanns några foton från Folkets park. Sen har jag någon slags minnesbild också av att det fanns någon översiktsfoto i någon tidning som visade hur bostad låg i förhållande till Folkets park och hur han kanske hade gått. Det fanns väldigt mycket uppgifter och det där läste jag in och antecknade och tog med mig tillbaks till Säter.
Quick would reconstruct how he had killed the 14-year-old boy 29 years ago. His doctors were impressed by Quick's memory, as if he traveled back in time with a time machine. However, that day, 1964, he had an alibi that he was going through confirmation in the church 60 miles away from where the crime would happen. The crime was prescribed, so it was not possible to press charges against Quick. It was only a test to see how trustworthy he was, which his therapist thought he was. The police who investigated the case had hidden parts of the investigation publicly that Thomas Quick could never read about. This was their way to prove that his version did not align with how the crime happened. This was the perfect moment to quit the investigation against Thomas Quick. But it did not happen. The prosecutor over Thomas Quick's cases ignored the voices of the people who understood the investigation and instead deemed Thomas as trustworthy. And this is where the idea of Europe's worst serial killer was born. As Thomas Quick got more interesting, some used it to their advantage to benefit their own careers. The prosecutor had tried to interfere with Quick's therapy in the asylum, and he wanted to reward Quick if he opened up more about past crimes. The greatest reward was the addictive pills that he was given. He was treated with psychotropic drugs in large quantities, and he figured out one way to be given more was to change personalities. One identity was Ellington, who wrote with one specific handwriting style, while his other identity, Nana, wrote like a child. His third personality, Cliff, only wrote on a computer and in English. The term serial killer was not common in Sweden before, but started to become bigger with movies like Silence of the Lambs and books like American Psycho, which Thomas Quick had read. He would meet a memory expert who himself was fascinated by serial killers. The doctors would, during therapy with Thomas Quick, dig up memories from his childhood that seemed to explain everything. Quick had committed crimes in the early days like sexual assaults against boys, robbery, and stabbing a man in 1974. He was already 20 years of age when he was sent to the mental hospital and treated for his personality disorders. He said that he was sexually assaulted by his father at an early age and that he had witnessed his newborn brother being killed. This was called the Simon illusion. Thomas would have seen his mother giving birth to his newborn brother, and right after his father would have cut him open. And the doctors would take this story as a fact, even though it never happened. Quick took on the blame for other crimes, even in countries like Norway and Denmark. He was given a list of names of boys that he could have murdered throughout the years, and he would admit to the crimes even though there was no evidence. As there were not enough boy names left, the therapist dug up new memories in Quick's mind. 1984, a tourist couple from the Netherlands was camping in the northern part of Sweden. As the couple went to sleep in their tent, the perpetrator stabbed them 100 times with 2 knives. This became known as the tent murders in Sweden. 10 years later, Thomas Quick would claim that he was the one who murdered the couple. But during reconstruction of the crime scene, he got many things wrong on how things actually happened. But he was still judged guilty in court for murdering the couple. In June 2001, he was sentenced for the murder of Johan, although it has never been proven that the boy was murdered. 4 years later, the case of Johan's disappearance was prescribed. Even though Quick claimed to commit murders that did not even happen, the court claimed that there was no reason for him to confess to false crimes. Revisiting the crime scenes along with Thomas Quick included specific rules too. While visiting the crime scenes, they would bring coffee, sandwiches, chocolate, and as much of the psychotropic drugs Quick wished to use. If it was required, he would be allowed stronger substances. If a body would be found, he would be allowed to open the grave and be left alone with his victim. He would be allowed then to touch a bone part. The searches got more intense and his behavior got more bizarre. He would turn into his other identity, Ellington. He talked about a specific place where he would have hidden bodies both from Sweden and Norway, but nothing could be found. 24 places were investigated with dogs and archaeological excavations, but nothing was found. Thomas Quick was sentenced for another murder where a body had been found. The Israeli Yinon Levi was found beaten to death in the forest in 1988. The investigators noticed that one of the interrogators helped Thomas Quick recall the incident by giving him details of the crime scene. The investigators decided to keep some information hidden then from the interrogator, which led to Thomas Quick not being able to give accurate information of how the crime took place. Suddenly, Quick mentioned the wrong weapon, place, and time for the crime. But eventually, the interrogator had access to information, and Quick suddenly was able to give off a more accurate reconstruction of the crime scene. All these cases could easily be turned down by a defense lawyer, but the lawyer himself, who represented Quick, saw him as guilty. So many investigators could confirm that Thomas Quick could not have committed any of these crimes. Many doubted him as guilty already from the start, and others were more sure along the way. For example, Thomas Quick claimed he had killed 2 boys who actually were alive. But still, he was convicted guilty for 8 cases out of 30. But then came a day when Thomas Quick changed his name back to his real name, Styr Bergwall, and he would retract all his statements.
But it turns out he wasn't a serial killer, rather he was a serial liar.
2008 Styr Bergwall admitted he had not committed any of the crimes he was sentenced for. He got free from all cases. But there were still people arguing for him still being guilty and denied this being a big scandal in crime history. During this period, there were tons of debates if it was possible for this man to have anything to do with these crimes.
Den vändning som har skett i Kvickfallet från skyldig till oskyldig gör att vi faktiskt missar att han kan vara skyldig.
Nej, det har vi faktiskt inte missat. Det är mycket enkelt. Kvick har aldrig ens träffat något av de här offren som man säger sig ha mördat. Utan det är rena fantasier. Och allt som behövs för att inse det är ett ganska minimalt förstånd.
The serial killer who was created in the asylum was now gone. But why did he take on the blame for these crimes? The will to solve these unsolved cases was so strong that people wanted to believe that he did it. And so they also convinced him that he was guilty.
Han säger alltså så här: kommer du ihåg att du sa att du hade vikt upp nedre delen av tältkanten? För mig står det klart alltså hur jag ska agera och vad det är jag ska berätta. Ska jag markera med den här?
And the violent serial killer shown on videos was just an intoxicated man. Styr Bergwall is today a free man. He has written books about his experience and is declared cured of his mental problems. Years later, a movie was made depicting this scandal.
Hur är det möjligt att dömas för mord när man inte ens vet att ett mord har begåtts?
The biggest tragedy of this story is that every false confession and every misstep in justice means that they are still unsolved cases, and family and friends are still waiting for answers.